let's have a look at the problems that people face when they're building a portfolio of HMOs. And look, why are we talking about HMOs and why have we linked HMOs to cash flow? I think everybody knows that a lot of people get into HMOs because you can generate phenomenal cash flow from HMOs. You know, you buy a normal house, you put one family in it, you make a return, and that's the sort of traditional buy to let. Now, do I think that model is dead? Because there's been a lot of commentators over the last couple of years that have said that buy to lets are dead because of the changes that the government have made to legislation, because it's so much more expensive to borrow money on a mortgage than it had been before. Do I think that buy to let is dead? Absolutely not. It's a complete fallacy to think that entire industry, that entire sector of property, has been wiped out just because interest rates have changed a little bit. We've got a franchisee who last month secured a normal buy to let property in central London, making a 25% return. Now, I'll digress here ever so slightly, but you know, this is my opinion of that. I think something like 56% of people in the UK who are property landlords are landlords who only own one property. And that's because the majority of them are accidental landlords. You know, they've moved in with somebody else and they've kept the flat that they used to live in. Now, why did they originally buy the flat that they used to live in? They bought it because they wanted to live there. They didn't buy it as an investment. The guy, our franchisee who bought that property in central London last month, he bought it as an investment. So his criteria for buying that property was very high. And that's why that's going to be a success. And it's got that margin in there that protects him, that shields him, even if interest rates go up from where they are at the moment. However, if you bought a flat or a house to live in, and then you move out and you want to rent it out, you know, the original reason that you bought that has got nothing to do with the margins that you're going to create. And therefore, it's those landlords that as soon as the interest rates go up by 1 or 2 or 3%, it's those landlords that are squeezed. And it's those landlords that the media talk to get this sensationalist story that buy to let is dead. And that's my opinion on it. Buy to let is absolutely not dead. However, if you buy a house and you look at putting a family in it and you know you're going to make, let's say, an 8% return, you know, that's an okay return. That outperforms the stock market as an average over the last 10 years. But if you want to maximize that return, then you will consider HMO. You're probably going to consider service accommodation as well, but you'll definitely consider HMO. Because in a HMO, you're going to put more people in there, you're going to have more tenancies in that house, and you're probably going to increase the amount of turnover and profit that you make. So you might go from 8% on a buy-to-let to 14% on a HMO. And when you've taken all the additional factors into consideration, like are you going to manage it? If you've got an agent managing it, if you're going to manage it, do you know how to run the compliance? Do you have the time to do it? Because obviously you're going to have 5, maybe 6 tenancies in there instead of 1. So the demand on your time is much more than just running a simple buy-to-let. So that's my digression over and done with. It's back to the main topic of the webinar. So HMO problems. What kind of problems do people have when they're trying to build their portfolio of HMOs? There is lots of legislation. Planning specifically deals with HMOs, so you need to understand what you can and can't do, and how many bedrooms you can create in HMOs versus not being able to. There's also extra costs being put in place by local government in order to license HMOs. And now a lot of property licensing gets quite a bad name. And it's seen as a money-making scheme for the council to just make a bit more income, make like £600 or £700 every 3 or 4 years from landlords. But actually, HMO licensing, I think, and again, this is just my opinion, but HMO licensing is actually a really good thing. The purpose of HMO licensing is to make the property as safe as possible for the tenants, because you've got 5 or 6 people in a HMO. You've got they might not speak to each other. They might not even see each other because one works nights, one works days. And so licensing makes sure that the fire risk is mitigated for, even with people that are not talking to each other that are living in the same house. And I've got no problem with that. You know, the safety of tenants is a good thing. but you need to, you as the person that is operating that portfolio, you need to know what that is. So like all things with the law, ignorance is not an excuse. So you need to make sure that you're up on the legislation, the planning, and the licensing. And that can stop a lot of people from starting with HMO. Let's be honest, they'll look at it, they'll hear a couple of things about it. They might hear some bad stories from other people that have run HMOs, and that's enough to make them go straight back to buy to let as the option, because they see buy to let as a much more vanilla strategy. Problems number 2, can't identify deals. So how do you know what is potentially a HMO? Or you find a property that is a HMO that's been on Rightmove, that's been operated as a HMO for the last 6 or 7 years, but you just can't make the margins work, because what's been asked for that property means that the margin that you make when you take the income into consideration is about the same as a buy-to-let. So you either look at converted properties that you can't make work, and people that own those properties that won't reduce their price, or you look at unconverted properties, and then you're just looking at properties that aren't HMOs, and you've got no idea whether you can convert them into a HMO, how much it'll cost, and at the end of that, once you refinance, how much you're going to be able to refinance for, and whether those margins work. Totally legitimate concerns when you're looking for HMOs. Then in the conversion compliance, so now you've bought a property, let's say, and you need to convert it into a HMO, and now you've got more compliance and more legislation that you need to stick to in order to be able to do that. I mean, there's just compliance coming out of your ears here. So how do you stay on the right side of compliance when it comes to converting your HMO? I'll give you an example, actually. I'll give you an example, because on one of the HMO conversions that I did, I had the HMO officer come round, and the deal was, and this was a few years ago, they tend to charge for this now, but when I did this one, it was free. So the agreement was they were going to walk around the house, they were going to make a list of things for me that I had to do to change that house from a normal family home into a HMO and compliant with a HMO license, because the housing officer, the housing HMO officer from the housing side of the council is interested in making sure that you're compliant with the license. And she went into one of the bedrooms, and in that bedroom, I promise you, I had 8 individual plug sockets, 8 individual plug sockets in there. And she looked at those plug sockets, and she just reminded herself on the criteria of the license. And she said, "Oh, you're going to need to change some of these plug sockets." And so I said, "Okay, why do I need to change these plug sockets?" And she said, "Because the license states that you need to have 4 double plug sockets in each bedroom." And I pointed out to her that 4 double plug sockets was exactly the same as 8 single plug sockets. And at that point, do you think she said, "Oh, yeah, that's really reasonable. That's a very reasonable way of looking at that. Don't worry about it. You can stick with eight single plug sockets"? Of course she didn't. She said, "I'm afraid you're going to need to change it, because the license clearly states you need 4 double plug sockets." So it's just ludicrous. However, that's what you need to be compliant with. And you need to know those details. And you need to make sure that if you're employing a build team in order to convert the HMO, convert that property into a HMO, that they are sticking within those the framework of the license. So again, that can be something that from the outside, when you look at it, you just think, "Oh, geez, I that's a big document that I need to read, and I don't want to take on the responsibility. And what if I'm not compliant?" And people just walk away. Number 4, financing. Now, this is one that a lot of people, especially online, talk about, that there are massive opportunities in financing for HMOs. Let's not kid each other, right? Especially when it comes to commercial valuations. But what is a commercial valuation? How do you get it? And what are the risks? Because a lender's not just going to throw more money at you without them having the security of knowing that they are going to be able to get it back if everything goes wrong. So therefore, you need to, again, do your homework, understand what's going on. And the decision that you make, you need to understand the benefits and you need to understand the negatives and the drawbacks and the potential problems that you're going to face going forward. And then finally, we come to the tenants. And people genuinely, especially in areas where there are no current HMOs and you can't double check the performance of those HMOs, people just don't have the confidence they're going to be able to find the tenants. And again, so especially if it's your first one in an area where you can't find other HMOs, genuinely reasonable concern. So these are HMO problems that hold people back from starting and scaling a HMO portfolio. So what you're going to learn here, we're going to talk about HMO types because the demand for different HMO types is different in all areas. So what you might find is we're going to go through a bit of education for this because I want you to understand that in certain areas of Nottingham, let's say, the ones that don't have the Article 4 area, for those of you that are a little bit more educated on HMOs, what the opportunity is and whether there's still an opportunity if there is an Article 4 area. For those of you that are quite early on your journey of HMOs, don't worry if you don't understand what an Article 4 area is. We are going to go over that in a little while. Then we're going to look at fast tracking your sourcing. Look, this is a webinar. We're going to be here for about an hour, aren't we? So I can't go through all of the different ways that you would look for property that you can convert to it or into a HMO. What we're going to do is we're going to look at a couple of different options that help you make decisions and look at data that's out there on the market right now to guide you in the right direction to find HMO properties or HMO potential properties much, much, much faster. That was a wordy sentence. Sorry about that. We're going to look at financing, and I'm going to explain the pros and cons about the different options of financing because it's important. We're going to look at conversion hacks, and again, I'm not going to go into a massive amount of detail on specific things that you can do within the property, but in order to get you from a place of A, which is not having a HMO, to B, having a HMO that you've had converted compliantly, I'm going to give you an absolutely killer hack that hopefully is going to help you choose the right team and get in the right place for converting your HMO. Oops, missed one. How to find tenants and grow your occupancy. So then we're going to look at, I'm going to look at very quickly the bog standard stuff that if you employ an estate agent, they'll be doing for you, or you should be doing for yourself if you're going to be self-managing. But then taking it to the next level, what can you do in order to make sure that your occupancy is the highest in your area? And when I was running my HMO portfolio, because I didn't have any HMO management companies in my area, so I had to manage my HMO portfolio myself. And actually, that's one of the things that I would recommend to everybody, especially you guys that are starting up. If you've never managed a HMO, you should manage it. Even if there are plenty of estate agents or letting agents in the area that will manage that HMO for you, I think everybody should manage at least their first HMO, because then you understand what's involved. You understand what you're paying for with that a letting agent. And when you then have conversations with letting agents in the future, you come to that conversation from a position of intelligence and a position of experience, rather than outsourcing everything on day one and not really knowing whether that letting agent is doing a good job for you. I genuinely pity rental agents that I talk to right now because of the questions that I ask them, and the only reason that I ask them those questions. And you can see in their face when I ask the questions that other people don't ask the questions. But you can see in their face that other people don't ask those questions and they're genuinely fearful or concerned about answering those questions. I'll go over what those questions are a little bit later on. There's another tease for you. So just looking at a bit of success that we've had within our network. This is a HMO that was bought in Barrow in Furness in the northwest, valued at 135, purchased for 112,500. Renovation works of 30, final valuation £200,000, and that's just bricks and mortar all the way through. Bricks and mortar, again, for you guys that understand what I'm talking about. That's bricks and mortar. We'll go through finance, don't worry. Gross income £4,000. When you take out all the costs and the utility bills and so on and so forth, net income £2,000. And that was funded by Sourced for one of our franchisees. Now, this guy, this was actually done by one of our franchisees called Gabriel. Gabriel joined us in order to build his HMO portfolio, and he's done that. He's done exactly that. In fact, he's bought 6 in the last 3 years since he joined us, and this is one of those 6. Oh, and that was, off the top of my head, that was a 6-bed. Here's Hadley House, obviously pool table up there, cinema room, bottom left, you can see a couple of kitchens, lovely big rooms. This was an old care home. This, again, was one of our franchisees. This was an old care home that was converted into a 24-bed HMO. Now, this is a huge thing. Got huge facilities in there. It's even got a gym in there as well. So the numbers for this one are much, much bigger. Valued at 450, bought for 350. Renovation works 350, so 700 all in, and the final valuation of 1.2 million. Net income after, again, utility bills and all costs are taken out, £6,000 a month. Now, who wouldn't want another £6,000 to put into their pocket to take care of their monthly costs? And that's why we talk about HMOs and cash flow in the same sentence, because of that regular rental income that's being produced that can be very, very, very significant. Again, this one was funded through Sourced for one of the Sourced franchisees. So why am I talking to you about HMOs? Why am I the right person that you should be listening to? My name's Chris Kirkwood. I'm the Managing Director of Sourced. Through my career, I've founded, run and grown multiple businesses in different business sectors. Property was always a thought of mine when I was in different business sectors, up until the point that I made a significant pot of money, and then I started investing into property. And after a short period of time, I realized that property was the industry that I wanted to be in. So I exited by selling all of the other businesses that I was running, and then put all my efforts into property. Been involved in deals from £55,000, which was actually one of mine. And in fact, I went to see a franchisee who'd bought a 2 up, 2 down property in Rotherham 2 weeks ago. And that deal he bought, I think, for £30,000. So actually, I've been involved in deals smaller than 55 grand, but 150 million is still the biggest deal that I've been involved in. Executed many different property strategies to build my own portfolio, and also learned and had experience and advised people on pretty much every single property strategy that there is going. My job now is to overview the strategy, direction, and drive of the Sourced Group. So in that, we have a support team that look after the franchisees. We have a marketing team that grows the Sourced brand in order to make it easier for our franchisees to either borrow money or secure property through estate agents. We have a lending team within Sourced, because we operate an in-house lender that people can borrow money from, just like the 2 examples that I just showed you. So my job now is to look after all of those. So without further ado, let's get into the webinar. So I said that I was going to explain what Article 4 is. Actually, before I do that, can I just find out if does anybody know what Article 4 is? Is anybody so confident about explaining what Article 4 is that they would come on and tell me what Article 4 is on the webinar? I'm not going to make you. I'm just interested in who has the confidence to explain what it is. Now, we've got quite a few people on this webinar, so I imagine that a lot of them, or some of you guys are going to be Sourced franchisees, because you come onto all of our content, which is amazing. Interesting. Never heard of Article 4 as a comment. Appreciate it. Okay, all right. So, look, if you haven't heard of Article 4 and you don't understand what I'm talking about, it's where too many HMOs, local council licensing, okay? Interesting. Nobody's nailed it yet. Right. If you don't know what Article 4 is and you're serious about HMOs, you need to go and find out. I'm going to tell you now, but the chances are, because this is such a wider question than just the jargon of Article 4, because to understand Article 4, you need to understand the planning system, but it can be specifically about HMOs. I'm just reading the Q&A to see if anybody... Yeah, no worries. Area where HMOs can't be established. Ooh, good one. Closest one so far. Planning required, closest one. That's a close one as well. So Right. So the planning system. Let's very, very quickly explain the planning system. So the whole of Wales is Article 4. Yeah, that's absolutely right, Sal. The planning system. So the planning system was created to have control over what people do with buildings. So instead of you just building whatever you want to build, you had to go to the local council and ask their permission to build what you wanted to build. Now, that continued up until I think it was about 1996, 1995, 1996, where there were so many requests going through the local planning office that something had to be done to change the system. So what they did is they put in something called permitted development. So for some things, you no longer had to go through the planning system and make an application if you were in line with what this permitted development was allowing you to do. So for example, if you want to change the windows on your house, you probably don't need planning. If you want to add a small extension to the back of your house, you probably don't need planning. And that's because those small changes are allowed under permitted development. Okay, we're going to call that PD as we move forward. So you can make these small changes, and a residential property in the UK has got a planning code of C3. A HMO with 5 or more people in, but less than 7, less than 8, no, less than 7. A HMO has got a different planning code of C4. Now, normally to move from one planning code or one use class is what they're called to another use class, you need to have a full planning application approved. But the government said, well, look, you're not actually changing that much about the house. If you want to take a normal family home, which is use class C3, and change it into a C4 type HMO, then you can. And you can do that under permitted development. So you don't need full planning to change a normal family home into a HMO. However, they made this thing called Article 4. And Article 4, they said to the local councils, if you want to stop that permitted development happening in any of your areas, you can make that area an Article 4 area. And an Article 4 area can be as big as one house. It can be as big as a whole city. Sorry, just reading another attempt. It can be as big as a whole city. But that gives the local council control as to where you can and can't build HMOs. Now, Article 4, the correct terminology for Article 4 is the removal of permitted development rights. So we're talking about HMOs. So what the permitted development to change a property from a C3 to a C4 is a permitted development. And the Article 4 direction can specifically remove that permitted development. Now, all other permitted developments, like changing your windows or building a small extension, they might still be allowed in that Article 4 area. So if you now go out and Google Article 4 in your area, you might find that there are a few Article 4 areas. The next step to that, though, is identifying what permitted development those Article 4 areas remove, because that's what you're not allowed to do in that area. That is Article 4. Now, you might not have taken all of that information in, and that's absolutely fine. We are going to send you a recording of this. But also, if you Google it, then there are some pretty good descriptions online for what Article 4 is. It's just going to back up exactly what I've just said. Now, I would say, when you go to like a networking event in property, 90% of the people in the room will fundamentally misunderstand what Article 4 is. And look, I've just opened the question up to everybody that's on this webinar, and nobody got the answer right, because the correct terminology is it's the removal of permitted development rights. So that's Article 4. So that's critical, right? Because if you need full planning to make a normal property into a C4 HMO property, and that's going to add time, that's going to add expense, that's going to, add a whole level of complication to that deal going ahead or not. So you might fundamentally choose not to look in Article 4 areas. And to choose to not look in Article 4 areas, you need to know where they are. So I've just gone through planning. and hopefully you understand the planning system a little bit better. Again, it's a complex old system, the planning system. But if you take it back to the bare bones, the essentials, it's actually quite a simple system. So hopefully that's pointed you in the right direction for looking at more information about planning. So planning comes from the planning department of the council. Licenses that we've just highlighted on the screen, that comes from the housing department of the council. So licenses are about, the HMO license specifically is what we're talking about, is about the fire risk, the fire safety, how safe it is for those tenants to live in that house. So it is a necessity if you have 5 or more people living in that property. So if you've got a 4-bed HMO, technically you don't need a HMO license for it. I had a 4-bed HMO and I still upgraded the property to be in line with licensing requirements. And the reason that I did that was because I am responsible for those tenants in that house. And if something goes wrong and I'm standing in front of a judge and the judge says, why didn't you are aware that there is a licensing requirement which your house didn't need to satisfy, but why didn't you do it up to licensing standards? I'm going to struggle to answer that question. So I thought, look, just to make sure that my tenants are as safe as possible and to cover my own back, I'm going to do it up to licensing standards. All of you in your local councils, on your local council websites, should be able to get hold of the HMO license requirements or the HMO license document. So you can see exactly what you need to do in order to convert that house to a HMO. Now, like I said, I used to get my HMO officer to come out and walk around the house. She'd spent like half a day there, walk around the house and list all the things that I needed to change in that house in order to turn it into a compliant HMO. A lot of councils now are charging for that. It's not hugely expensive. It's like a couple of £100, but you can still get that done by councils. Now, you need to be registered with the property ombudsman or a redress scheme, the property redress scheme, if you're going to be running and owning HMOs, because you need to have a complaints policy, a complaints procedure standing behind you. And you can choose ombudsman, redress, completely up to you. If you're going to be managing this yourself, you might elect to have a client account so that you can hold customers' deposits in that client account. Now, you would still need deposit protection on that deposit that you're holding, and you need to get registered within a certain amount of time. But there's a couple of really good ones out there: TDS, the top deposit service, or DPS, the deposit protection service. Really good, very, very low cost, but it's, in terms of compliance, something else that you have to do. You're going to be holding customers' data, so you might need data protection, and you'll probably need insurance. Well, you will need insurance for the house as well to make sure, again, it's just covering your back. And it's going to take a little bit of money out of your profit, but it's far better to do that and know that you're going to be able to sleep well than taking unnecessary risks. Now, so far, we've talked about HMOs from a purchasing point of view, but obviously that's not the only way that you can take control and make money from HMOs. That there is another way as well, which is rent to rent. Now, the most pertinent question, so if you don't understand what rent to rent is, I would rent a property. If I was the rent to renter, I would rent a property from a landlord. I'd convert it into a HMO. I'd rent it out to tenants by the room, and I'd make the margin between those two things. It's something that I've done before very, very successfully. Over £1,000 worth of profit going into my pocket every single month from each one of the properties that I managed on a rent-to-rent basis. By far, the most common thing that people get wrong is the contracts and understanding the contracts. So I'm just going to go through the contracts quickly here. I'm not going to go into rent-to-rent in any more detail because the main core of this webinar is for people that are actually going to buy the properties. So an AST property, so an assured short-hold tenancy. This is the kind of contract that you should use with a tenant, and no more. It should be for the tenant, and that's it. That should not be the contract that you use between you as the rent-to-renter and the landlord of the property. Now, the AST, as well as if you're buying the property, again, it's the AST that should be used for the tenant. You've got a management contract, and that can be applicable as the contract that you use between you, the renter, and the landlord. You've got a commercial lease, which you could use. Mortgage companies, especially if it's a residential property, mortgage companies don't tend to like commercial leases, and they'll say that you can't use it just because it's got the word commercial in it. And then a rent guarantee agreement, which is based on a common law tenancy, it tends to be the best contract for rent to rent, just because of the sort of flexibility that the contract has in it. So that's all we're going to say about rent to rent. Common law tenancy agreement between you and the landlord, AST agreement for the tenants. Now we're going to go back to purchasing the property. So let's have a look at fast tracking your HMO sourcing. So as I've said before, you can target two different things. You can target non-converted or converted. So non-converted is just normal family home. Converted are properties that have already been used as a HMO. And you can look online, you can look direct to vendor for either one of those two things. But you're searching for very, 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 very different things. So what would I do right now if you said to me, by the end of the day, you need to find me 5 HMOs that work? What would I do and where would I go first? Well, that is a great, great question. So this is what I would do. Genuinely, this is what I would do. And I love asking myself questions like that because I'd never sort of considered it before. But the way to fast track your sourcing is to find converted HMOs on Rightmove, and you would do that by using the keywords. So you can use HMO in the keyword. And then properties that have got the word HMO or the acronym HMO in the description will come up and be at the top of your search. Now, like I said to you before, if you run the numbers on those properties, they're probably not going to work because the landlord or the owner of the property knows how much money they can make from that property. And therefore, they're asking more money for that property than they are for other properties on the street. Even if, and again, this is a more technical point, even if they are only bricks and mortar valued, they'll ask more money for it because they know how much cash flow they can make from the property. So what you do is, instead of looking at that property, you look next door and you look at the house after that, because you'll get some financial data from that property on Rightmove that you can then use to predict how much money you're going to make if you did the conversion on the cheaper property next door. That is just logical, such a logical way to approach how to source things instead of scrolling and ending up, I call it Rightmove blind, because you've looked at so many properties, you've got no idea what you're looking at now, and you've even forgotten where you are, who you are, and what you're looking for. So go to Rightmove, type in HMO into the keywords, find that house, find out where it is, like which street it's on, and then search for other properties around there that are a similar layout, and then put that deal together and see if those deals work. So you're using converted properties to determine where you can find non-converted properties. That is a game changer. And then again, the same on Spare Room. If you go to Spare Room, you can find quite a lot of financial information about, you can see how much they're charging for the rooms. You can see the internal pictures of the property. You can see how many rooms are empty. So if it's a 6-bedroom property, it's only got 1 bedroom spare, you know that the demand is pretty good in that area. And then on Spare Room as well, you can follow that advert so that you can see how quickly that advert disappears and therefore how much demand there is in that area. Amazing. Absolutely amazing what information you can get. So then you would model that as well. So you're finding out where that property is, and then you go to Rightmove and you look for properties that are for sale in or around that area. So it was a fast track for you to understand where and what to look for. All you're doing is modeling success. Perfect. That is a great hack for sourcing HMOs. Any questions about that? I really, really hope you all try that afterwards. Yeah, so thanks very much, Gertie. Appreciate your comment. Thank you, Chris. It's a great nugget. I was looking on auctions, but your way is much better as the auction properties are most likely not nearby. Exactly right. And you've got to be the person that determines whether that property is going to work as a HMO. So the amount of due diligence that you need to do is just doubled or trebled. Whereas if you do it this way, you've got that factual information of that other property that's previously been run as a HMO. Boom. There we go. So let's move on to financing HMOs. Now, again, this is going to get a little bit technical. Don't worry if you don't understand it. You're going to get a recording and you can also do your own research online. Just got another question. Yeah, you are welcome, Otis. Loving the interaction, guys. Thanks very much. So insights into financing HMOs. It's a bit of a crappy chart, this, but look, it's accurate. So there are a couple of different options that you've got when it comes to financing. First of all, you've got short-term financing, and they're at the top. That's bridging and peer-to-peer. So if you look on the left-hand side, bridging and peer-to-peer, they are short-term finance options. Then further down, you've got mortgage and you've got a commercial mortgage. And then right at the bottom, you've got JV or loan. Now, bridging finance, short-term, high cost. You can generally borrow more money from bridging than you can from a mortgage. So what people tend to do is they'll bridge a property or bridge a development or bridge a project for up to 18 to 24 months. And then they'll refinance it once they've already added the value and uplifted the value of the property onto a mortgage in order to keep it long-term, low cost. So bridging finance is upfront, upfront, high cost, but borrow more money from. Peer-to-peer, which is the type of financing that we operate here at Sourced and we offer to our franchisees, is exactly the same. Now, the only people that we offer peer-to-peer finance to is our franchisees. So what they tend to find when we've done analysis from peer-to-peer against bridging is that most of our franchisees can achieve borrowing more from sourced capital than they can from an external bridging company. And the reason for that is we only deal with our franchisees, so we have an existing relationship with them. Now, if you can borrow, the more money you can borrow at the front end, the less money you need in your own pocket, which means one of two things. It either means you can get into bigger deals quicker, or it means that you can do more projects at the same time because you need less money per project. So that's financing on a short-term basis. So you might buy the property, buy a normal property on a bridge or on peer-to-peer, convert the property into a HMO and then get it revalued. You might even run it for a short period of time to prove what the income is you can make from that property, and then you would refinance it onto a mortgage or a commercial mortgage. So mortgages, I'm sure you've heard of, very straightforward, tends to be, for investment property, tends to be 75%. And then commercial property, commercial finance. Now, this is the one that a lot of people talk about when they're talking about HMO as the pinnacle, the absolute game changer, because when you come to commercial finance, they don't value the property based on the bricks and mortar of the property. They don't value the property based on the physical property alone. They look at the income that the property is generating, and they can give you a commercial mortgage based on the income that it's generating, which can mean that the value of the property can significantly increase. So if the value of the property is significantly increased, but the commercial mortgage company is still going to give you 75% loan to value, it means that not only could you pay off all of your costs when you're refinancing, but you could also put a significant amount of money in your pocket. So for example, the Hadley House example that I gave you earlier, bought for 350, 350's worth of works, values that or gets that in the region of £700,000. That was then valued on a commercial basis of 1.2 million. So a significant increase in the value of that property. Now, you might be thinking, and quite rightly so, because of what I've told you, that all sounds unbelievable, and commercial finance is exactly what you're going to be going for. But, you know, we have a relationship with our franchisees where we tell them about the bad stuff as well as the good stuff. So I'm going to talk you through the pros and the cons of commercial finance. Just got a question that I'm going to look at. Do lenders still have a 6-month rule before refinancing? Oh, it's such a can of worms, that, Gurdeep. as with most property questions, the answer is yes and no. Rule is a strong word. It was guidelines. The only reason that 6-month thing was put in place because after 2007, 2008, when lenders had a meeting and looked at each other and said, you know what, we were taking the mickey with these one-day refinances a little bit. Let's put a 6-month guidelines in place where we'll all wait for 6 months before we can refinance or before we can sell a property on. And you know, to be honest, they stuck to it for ages and ages and ages. However, it's now changed where there are bridging companies out there that will do a 1-day bridge. It's slightly different now in comparison to before 2007 because now they need to the company will say, well, if you take our bridge and hold it for a day, you can then go onto our mortgage product. So it tends to have to be with the same company, but you can still do 1-day refinances now. So to think that it was ever something that was an absolute must that you had to hold it for 6 months isn't accurate. So commercial valuation. So let's look at the ways in which a property can be valued commercially. So you've got a multiple of rent. So they look at the gross rent roll and they'll say that gross rent roll in this area will say that you can multiply that by 10 and that will be the valuation of the property. Or you multiply by 8 or 12.5. The 12.5 is the highest one that I've ever seen, or 7 or whatever it is. And that's completely down to the discretion of the surveyor. But you get your rent roll, you multiply it by something that the surveyor tells you, and that tells you the value of the property. And if it's different from the bricks and mortar value, then it's different from the bricks and mortar value. But that's what the surveyor has said that it's worth. So that's a really easy way of commercially valuing the property. You can look at the yield. So you look at the local yield that's being generated by HMOs in the area. And, you know, surveyors get a bad rap. And I can understand why, because they've got so much power. You know, they've got the power to determine whether your property deal goes ahead. So, but they do, when they're doing valuations, and especially commercial valuations of HMOs, they do put in a lot of effort in order to give you that number. They can look at the local yield. So they'll look at all the HMOs that are operating in the area. And they'll work out what the yield is that's being generated by those HMOs. And then they'll use the amount of money that you're generating to determine what the value of that your property is going to be. It's quite a complex little calculation there. So we've actually created a calculator that we've given to our franchisees to help them. All they have to do is plug in the local yield and plug in what the rent roll is, and then it spits out what the value of that property is. And then you've got, for surveyors that sort of take it a little bit, what's the word I want to use? They don't have the confidence in the multiple, or they don't have the confidence in the yield. They'll use a bricks and mortar value. So they'll give it a bricks and mortar value and they'll add 30%. And that's where the majority of properties on Rightmove that are overinflated in comparison to the houses that are for sale on the same street around them, that's how most of them are valued. Roughly, you look at 30%. So again, going back to the sourcing that we were talking about earlier, if you then look at the houses next door, they should be 30% cheaper. So if you can get that build work done that isn't going to cost you that margin, then you can actually buy the house next door, fix it up into a brand new HMO, and start operating it cheaper than buying the established HMO next door. Another little tip. And then you've got JV or loan. So if you go into a venture with somebody else, then you know, it's just completely down to your negotiation as to what can happen with that property, with that loan, and how much you're going to borrow in the terms, and so on and so forth. So this is the Hadley one that I was talking about earlier, which was 350 purchase, 350 works, 1.2 million valuation. So the pros of a commercial finance are that you can release more money, and it can be a faster process because, my word, normal residential mortgages are a pain in the arse. So it can be a faster process. However, the cons, and this is significant, and this is something that you have to be aware of, especially for you guys that said that you're at the start of your HMO journey. Imagine this. I'm going to take some numbers just completely out of thin air here. Imagine you buy a property that's a residential property for £100,000, and you spend £50,000 doing it up. Now the residential value, the bricks and mortar value of that property is now, let's say, £200,000. But you can get a commercial valuation for that property because let's say it's a 7-bed in an Article 4 area and it's worth £200,000. Obviously, we're dealing with somewhere crappy up north. When we're based in Warrington, so I'm not saying the whole north is crappy, just to mitigate and stop any hate. I live in the north and I absolutely love it. But let's say that your bricks and mortar value is now £200,000, but you can get a commercial value based on the yield, based on the income that you're generating from that property of £300,000. Now, if you go for a residential bricks and mortar value, you're able to borrow 75%. That means you can borrow 150 grand. And 150 grand covers all your costs because you spent 100 grand purchasing it and 150 grand doing it up. But if you borrow 75% of £300,000, then you can borrow £225,000. Now, that not only pays off all the costs that you had for doing the property up in the first place, but it also puts 75 grand in your pocket. Now, that's all right, isn't it? However, and this is what you have to be very careful with. What happens if you need to sell it? What happens if you need to sell that property? Now, it's fine if you can sell it to somebody who's going to buy it on a commercial basis. But as we've just seen, that's an inflated value on the bricks and mortar value of the property. So why wouldn't somebody just look next door? Why wouldn't they do whatever they could to purchase something for a lower cost and then to avoid having to pay the higher cost of buying yours? And if you're forced into the sale, then you might only be able to find somebody that's going to buy it on offer from a residential value, which means that you might be forced to sell it for £150,000, even though you've got £225,000 worth of borrowing on it, which puts you in negative equity for that £75,000 that you put in your pocket and then spent immediately. That is dangerous. Now, if you're going to buy your first property on a commercial basis, that's a big risk. If you're going to buy your 10th property on a commercial basis and all the other ones that you bought on a bricks and mortar basis, that's mitigated because if you need to raise that 75 grand, you've now got 10 other properties that you can manipulate, sell, refinance, or whatever in order to raise that 75 grand that you need to get out of that mortgage for the commercially valued HMO. That's a good way of mitigating your risk. So that's a more sensible approach to commercially valuing and taking up commercial valuations on HMOs. I really hope that makes sense. Because, you know, that I love the technical aspect of property. It's phenomenal. Would they not get a commercial loan at the same value? Well, what's the point? So, Gertie, it's a really good question. Would they not get a commercial loan at the same value, at the same LTV? So yes, they would. It's normally you can get up to 75% for a commercial loan, but let's say that they don't need all of that 75% and they pare it back so that they're only borrowing £150,000, just like the normal mortgage. Well, why would you do that? Because the commercial valuation the commercial mortgage is probably going to have a higher interest rate than a normal HMO residential mortgage. So there wouldn't be much point in doing that. But it's a good question, and I like the way you're thinking about this. So you could get your full sale price. Yeah, on refinance, you could get your full sale price. Absolutely. A lot of social housing being sold, inflated around Birmingham. Will these last? It's a good question. It's a good question. Look, if you can get the valuation now, it's worth looking at, isn't it? You just need to take your entire situation into consideration and not just look at, I can borrow more money. I'm going to put 75 grand in my pocket and I'm going to go and buy a nice new Mercedes. That is, you know, when you consider the cons, that could be seen as reckless. Oops. Which HMO types should you focus on? So I said I was going to talk you through the different HMO types, because in one area, you might have a massive demand for one HMO type and absolutely zero demand for another. So you need to be aware of what exactly you're looking at and what you're looking for to, again, to make good decisions. So first of all, student HMOs. These are the ones that everybody thinks of. When you first think of HMOs, especially for you guys that have been to university, you, like me, probably lived in an absolute hole of a HMO that was disgusting. that made everyone ill, and you both hated and loved living there at the time, which is probably why students go out so much, because, well, A, they've got disposable income, and B, they want to get out of their house. Benefits. So you could work with your local council to provide them housing, and the local council will choose people on benefits, and they'll put them into your HMO. Now, what tends to happen with those kind of contracts is the local council chooses the people for you. They are your tenants. There's nothing you can do about that, and you sign over your property for a period of time to that local council, like 3 or 5 years is typical. And then you're paid at the local housing association rates. Long lease or housing association or social care. So these are for like specific needs. So you could go to a housing association and provide a HMO for orphan children, for example, or people with special needs. And these housing associations, or places like Serco, who provide houses for people who are seeking asylum. These long leases can be up to 7 to 10 years. So again, you're signing it across to them. The leases with some of them are fully repairing and insuring, so they'll give you back the property in the same state in which they got it in the first place. But that's basically hands-free. So you've got long lease HMOs. Then you've got the type of HMO. So if you're going to do a private HMO, what type of tenancy you're going to put in there? Because the way that you decorate and the way that you set up a HMO for contractors would be completely different from the way that you set up a normal HMO or a high-end HMO. I once had, so around me in Knutsford, where I had some HMOs, I once had, there's a big industrial site just outside of Knutsford, like 5 or 6 miles away from Knutsford. But Knutsford's a very desirable place to live, with lots of sort of white collar, high end demand. But I would frequently get people from the local industrial estate that would come to look at my houses, and one of them had a cream carpet as soon as you walked in. And a lot of the guys, I'd open the door, they'd be there on time, I'd open the door, greet them, they'd literally look at the carpet and turn around and say, no, I can't live, because they didn't want to lose their deposits. So if I was going to set up and the demand was all coming from more of a blue collar sort of tenant type, then I'd probably be putting in laminate floors or making it much easier for those guys not to retain their deposits. So it's worth considering all of this when you're putting that HMO together, as to where your demand's coming from and how do you satisfy that demand in the way that you set up that HMO. How are we doing for time? 5 to 2. How can I hack the conversion? Okay, I've got one big tip here. There are specialists that only deal in converting HMOs. I Googled it this morning and I found hundreds in and around Manchester. HMO building and conversions. Now, obviously you'd use them because they've done this many, many times, and you can see examples of their work and so on and so forth. But really, the reason that you're using them is they probably know HMO legislation better than the local council. You know, they've been through it, they've done conversions in your area, they know exactly what was required, and they'll be able to help and guide you and make sure that you don't fall foul of not being compliant. So that's why when you're looking for contractors, just Google HMO builders, look around your area, have conversations with them, get them round and use them. So what I did with, I told you that I used the local council to come round and look at the property and give me a list of all the things that I needed to do to make that property compliant as a HMO. So I would take that list and I'd literally hand it to a builder and say, this is all the stuff that I need to do. How much is that going to cost? And without even seeing the property, they could give me a very good rough price as to how much that was going to cost. Perfect. And now tenants. So this is the obvious stuff, right? Everyone can do this. Hello again. We dropped off there, didn't we? Tell me where we got to. Where did I get to? Did we get to the how to find tenants? You can just let me know in the Q&A section. Because I'll just start talking from where it all went wrong. Let's have a look. Thanks for your answers. Appreciate it. The start of this section, hack the conversion. Okay. So just to make sure that you got that, hack the conversion was that you specifically use a HMO builder. How do I find tenants? Okay. So the obvious stuff. You can use an estate agent. Estate agent is probably going to use Rightmove, Dupla, or on the market. You can use spare room, and they'll use spare room if they're, decent. They might also use Gumtree again if they're a little bit better, if they're a little bit more savvy. However, this is why I pity letting agents when I go to talk to them, because you'll go and talk to them and they'll be so pleased with themselves when you say, what are you going to do to advertise my room? Because what I want is I want occupancy. I don't want any voids, and that's what I'm employing you for. And they'll say, oh, we're going to put it on our website. We're going to put your room on our website, and we're going to put it on Rightmove. And I'll say to them, well, anybody's going to do that. I could do that, but what else are you doing? I'm employing you to be better than everybody else. I'm employing you because you're doing things that I can't do. I'm not just employing you because of the time of doing it. I'm employing you because you're better. So what else are you doing? And at that point, a lot of them crumble and fall to pieces. Now, when I was managing HMOs in and around Knutsford, there was one winter that was very very cold, and we just didn't seem to get any new tenant inquiries through Spare Room or through Rightmove. And Knutsford's not a big place. There were probably about 8 HMOs in the area at the time in Knutsford, and 3 of them stopped being HMOs because the landlords just couldn't get tenants in. People had left and they could not find tenants anywhere else. And so they started making a loss and they closed down. Now, during that period, my HMOs were not the best in the area. They weren't the worst, but they weren't the best. They were probably, like 80%, 80 out of 100 good. But I maintained, and this is no word of a lie, I know it would be really easy for me to make this up, but I maintained 100% occupancy all the way through that. And the reason that I did that was because I networked with local businesses. So I went onto LinkedIn and I typed in Knutsford HR because I wanted to have conversations with HR departments. So I typed in Knutsford HR, and then I got a list of all the people that worked in HR in the Knutsford area, and I'd send them emails on LinkedIn and say, I've got rooms. I know you bring staff and you bring contractors into the area. Let's have a conversation about how I can save you money on hotels, or how I can give your staff a really good and thorough onboarding process when it comes to finding the right place to live to work for your company. And that's all my email would say. And I got loads of people getting back to me, because this is not something that they ever get. They don't get people calling them up saying, for nothing, I'm not going to charge you a thing and I'm going to help you. Would you like that? Of course, people are going to say yes. So I contacted local businesses and local restaurants. And with the local restaurants, I'd walk through the middle of town, and there's one called Evuna, and they had building work going on because they were just setting up. So I just walked in, talked to one of the builders there, asked who was in charge, and whether the owners were around. They pointed me to the back. I went to talk to the owner. I said what's she doing with staff. It turned out that she already had the same restaurant in Manchester, and they were bringing some of the staff over, but they didn't have anywhere to live. They ended up filling one of my HMOs just with staff from Evuna. Amazing, absolutely amazing. Because I'm going out there and I'm networking and I'm keeping my head up and I'm looking for opportunity. But that's what you should be employing an letting agent for. They should be doing that for you. White collar head offices and training hubs, exactly the same. look, if the LinkedIn thing isn't working, how can you get into the HR department? It's your local area, right? So you should know people that work there. So if you know somebody that works there, and I did this with the Barclays Technology Centre at Radbrook Hall in Knutsford, if you know somebody that works there, do they know anybody in HR? Who do they know in HR? And can they give me their contact details? And then I'll email them, or I'll pick up the phone, I'll give them a call, and I'll find out, look, this is all ways of putting money in your pocket. And so you've got to hustle in order to do this. And if you're going to choose to pay somebody else to hustle for you, you need to make sure that they are hustling and not just putting it on Rightmove and putting it on their website, because that's not good enough. So let's have a look at some success stories. That, you know, this webinar has been about HMOs, but we at Sourced, we do more than just HMOs. We cover every single property strategy. So deal sourcing and rent to rent. We've got people who have been selling. This guy, he secured 22 service accommodation deals. He sold 22 service accommodation deals within 48 hours of posting them on our app. Secured 38 rent to rent service accommodation units in one negotiation. I mean, just phenomenal when it comes to deal sourcing. We do refurbishments. This is Phil, who made 40 grand. This is Jamie. This is new build. Well, it's a residential conversion, but the old house that he knocked down, he only left one wall and used that one wall. So technically it is a conversion, not a new build, but converting the bungalow into a 4-bedroom house. This was an office block that he converted into 14 flats and then used them as service accommodation. And this is Nigel that converted that house into a HMO. 6-bed HMO, rents it out to the NHS, hands-free, gets paid every month. So let me ask you another question, if I may. Tell me what is holding you back. Why are you not making as much headway as you want to in HMO? So you've got a couple of options there. You've got that you can't find the right property, you don't know about contracts, you don't know about compliance. It's money because you don't have the deposits to buy the properties. You can't find tenants. Or option number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is nothing, and you're absolutely flying. I'll just leave this on for a couple of minutes while you consider your options. Okay, thanks very much. Much appreciated. So just to give you a bit of insight, over 70% of people have said money. Now, that's one of the things that we help our franchisees out with, actually, because our property app that we've started in order to enable them to sell deals, what they can also do on that property app, because essentially that property app links our franchisees to investors. What they can also do is, instead of just selling a deal, they can also go to those investors and say, look, I've got this opportunity and I want to borrow money from you for the upfront costs so I can purchase this property. You'll stay in the property for, let's say, 2 years until I've uplifted the value. I'll get a refinance. And on that refinance, I'll pay you out, including your interest. So that's one of the ways that we facilitate, or some of the things that we've got in our arsenal to facilitate our franchisees making money. When we talk about all these strategies, because we have full training for all of these property strategies, it's always done in the same way. So you've got research first, because you need to know your stuff. You need to know what you're looking for before you start looking. Then you've got source and crunch. Then you've got secure. Then you'd structure the deal in the right way. You've got your works, and then you've got your exit. And what is your exit, and how are you going to get there, and when do you need to start working on your exit? That's the structure of all of our training courses. Now, if you're going to do this on your own, which absolutely you 100% could do, lots of people do, and you're going to start a proper business at taking care of this, you would need to set up, pay for your own marketing, pay for your branding, probably get a website set up and get everything ready so that you look like a professional when you're doing it. Then you'd need to make sure you're trained, because I'm sure there's some things that I've talked about here. And look, this is only an hour, so I've not gone into a huge amount of detail about any of this. Imagine if we went into detail, how much of what we've talked about you wouldn't already know. So you need training to make sure that you know what you're doing. You then need to cover your salary for a period of time, because you're going to be dedicating yourself to property, and you probably need a bit of investment capital, especially if you're not borrowing from source capital because you're not a franchisee, because you're probably going to need some money in your pocket. So as a rough estimate, that's going to be like £50,000 that you need to start up. And then you've got ongoing costs as well, because you might need to buy property leads. You might need to buy investor leads as well and pay for a CRM system. You need to market to make sure that you're getting the investors or the landlords or whoever coming to you. You might want a mentor or a consultant. You're going to have to pay for funding applications. Again, with Source Capital, you wouldn't, but with external companies, a lot of them, if you make an application, require a fee being paid. You need to keep on top of your training, so you need to pay for monthly training events as well. Networking and potentially networking management if you're going to host it, and then you need to pay for documents and contracts. Look, the rent-to-rent contract that I had drawn up for me many years ago was £1,500. It's frightening how much it's going to be right now. So you're probably going to need about £5,100 per month to take care of your business as business expenses. For those things, though, if you need training, if you need support, you can go to a trainer. If you need unlimited support, you can go to a mentor. If you need investor leads and property leads, you can go to a lead generation company. That's going to cost you about 50 quid a lead. The mentor is probably going to cost you about 500 quid a month. That property training, if you go to some of the big training companies, £25,000 per year. If you want to sell a deal, if you want to go, you can go to an agent. That's going to cost you 1%. Again, we don't charge our franchisees to sell those deals. If you need funding or an agreement in principle, you have to go to a lender. Or joint ventures will also provide you an agreement in principle, and also joint ventures can fund your deal for you. At Source, we offer all of these things. That's all included in our package. And our package comes at the cost of £10,000 plus VAT to join, £315 per month to remain a franchisee for a 5-year term. If you're interested, sam.clayton@source.co is the place that you need to go, and Sam will answer your email and get back to you. But I'll do a Q&A right now, so if you've got any questions, please feel free to type it into the Q&A boxes that you've been using previously, and I'll sit here for another 10 minutes or so and answer those questions. And also, I really hope that you got some value from that. I hope there was some stuff in there that you didn't understand or didn't know already, that you now know that you've got to go and research and look at. Because that's the point of these webinars. It's to provide value for you guys so that you are able to move forward, and you're able to move forward in a way that is sustainable. This is the bit that gives me an opportunity to take a little drink and just stop talking. Why would you recommend HMO more so than buy, fix, and flip properties? Well, I never said that I would. It's a really good question. But at no point during that webinar have I said that I would recommend HMOs more so than any other strategy, because I can't possibly recommend a strategy for you because I don't know you and I don't know your situation. Now, what you can achieve from HMOs is cash flow. You're building a portfolio that's comparatively to buy to let higher cash flow in. If you're doing flips, then you're going to produce cash less frequently, but you're going to produce bigger amounts of cash. Now, if I was to look at your situation, if I was to guide you as to which one to look at, I'd look at your experience, and not just within property, but outside of property as well. I'd look at all of your experience, your skill set, how much money you've got in the bank, whether you can sustain yourself through that flip. Because if you're going to do a flip, you are the last person to get paid. Your lender, your original lender, your builder, everybody gets paid before you. And is that something you can sustain, or is that going to put you under too much financial pressure? So I'd look at all of those things before I decide which is the best one for you. Phil, thanks very much. Thanks for your presentation. When is your next onboarding enrollment? Really good question. We've actually only got one more this year. So if you're interested in joining Sourced, you've only got one more opportunity to come to our induction. And that's going to be at the end of November. Gurdeep, that is a question for Sam. Do you have any banks supporting the franchise fee and operating cash flow? That's a question for Sam. So sam.clayton@source.co, the email address that's on your screen right now. Take a note of that and ask Sam, because Sam is much more up to date than I am on that. Phil, you are welcome. Gurdeep, you are welcome. All right, there's no other questions. I've answered all your questions. Oh, no, I haven't. I've got a commercial property. I'm looking to convert into a 12-bed, which you have planning for. I'm looking for funding for the development. Is this something that can be done through Source? Yep. I've just shown you one that we did for 24 beds. So, yep, it's absolutely something that we can look at. Again, if you email Sam. Alicia, you are more than welcome. And thank you for your thank you. Cool. Appreciate it, guys. Thanks for spending, I don't even know what day it is. Thanks for spending Tuesday afternoon with me. Again, I genuinely hope you got some value from it. And if you've got any questions, sam.clayton@source.co. Thanks a lot.